These are the 7 levels of buffs in competitive Pokemon singles. Starting at level 1, Too Little, Too Late. These are Pokemon buffs given to creatures that needed help a very long time ago. There was a time when these creatures had genuine potential but were missing important basic options, yet for years they were left neglected. And when the time finally came for them to receive a buff, it was way too late and it made almost no difference. The prime candidate for this sort of buff is the unfortunate Electivire. Electivire was released all the way back in Gen 4, where it was a decent Pokemon. It ended up ranked OU in this generation. Electivire stood out as a physical attacking electric type, which didn't really exist at the time, and it could get by reasonably well with its strong mixed attacking options and its good ability Motor Drive, which grants +1 speed if struck by an electric move, and immunity to the electric type completely. However, even then, Electivire wasn't outstanding. A lot of people think its OU rating is a little bit outdated, and it's not very commonly seen in Gen 4 competitive play. Yes, Electivire has an impressive attack stat of base 123, but for a long time its only option for an electric type stab move has been Thunder Punch, which is a very weak attack. Thunder Punch only has 75 power, which is far below the common stab options of other Pokemon. Now technically Electivire does have another option in Wild Charge, which has 90 power, but Wild Charge comes with 1/4 recoil damage, which is a pretty huge drawback for not much reward. 90 is not even that high of a power. A lot of moves just have 90 power without any drawback. But now Electivire finally has a good electric type physical attack in its moveset, the move Supercell Slam, which is a massive improvement over Thunder Punch and Wild Charge. Supercell Slam has a 100 base power, which is very good, 95 accuracy, and the unfortunate drawback of losing 50% of your health if it misses. But it's unlikely to miss, and this is overall a way better attack than Thunder Punch or Wild Charge. The drawback is more manageable, and the reward is higher for using it. This is the option Electivire has wanted for so many years, finally getting it in Gen 9, over a decade after its initial release where it was wanting for such an option. And what difference did this make? It made absolutely no difference whatsoever. Electivire in Gen 9, despite receiving this option that it's wanted for years, is ranked in the lowest possible tier of ZU, and in fact, even in the lowest tier in the game, nobody is using Electivire. It's not even present on the viability rankings, which means it's not considered viable in ZU, the lowest tier in the whole game. So this buff is way too late. The time when this buff could have had a little bit of an impact is long past. Gen 9 is far too powerful of a generation. This may have made a difference a couple of generations ago, but in Gen 9 it's not helping Electivire even be viable in the lowest tier in the game. And it doesn't help that even Supercell Slam, which is the best physical electric type attack Electivire has ever had, still comes with a drawback. They truly hate this Pokemon and don't want to give it anything nice. You can't just give this guy an electric type attack that does damage without any bells or whistles. No. If Electivire misses Supercell Slam, it takes crash damage equal to half of its HP. And for some reason, Supercell Slam has a lower base power than the equivalent fighting type attack High Jump Kick, which has the exact same drawback, but a far higher base power of 130. This is very reminiscent of Wild Charge, which has a way lower power than other recoil attacks, despite having the exact same drawback. I think they just hate electric type physical attackers, and they do not want them to thrive. They hate them. Next on this level of Too Little Too Late buffs, we have Banette. And believe it or not, there was a time when Banette was a genuinely sort of functional Pokemon. It was niche, it wasn't fantastic or anything, but Banette in Gen 3 OU could do some stuff. And that was because Banette at the time was an uncharacteristically good physical attacking ghost type. It's the only real good physical attacking ghost type in the whole game at that point in the series. Banette actually has a great attack stat of 115. All of its other stats are horrible, but its attack stat is workable. And in Gen 3, Shadow Ball was a physical attack due to the lack of a physical special split. Banette could also use Hidden Power Fighting, which was also a physical attack at the time, for the perfect ghost fighting coverage combo, allowing it to threaten a good portion of the metagame along with Will-O-Wisp to inflict burns on things. It was an aggressive spin blocker that could do good physical damage and threaten Pursuit Tyranitar unlike other ghosts. However, in Gen 4, Banette may have suffered the most out of all Pokemon in the game from the physical special split, as it could no longer use physical Shadow Ball or physical Hidden Power, and its physical attacking moveset was now extraordinarily limited. Its best Ghost Stab option was Shadow Claw, 10 power weaker than Shadow Ball was, and even weaker than Electivire's Thunder Punch. A terrible physical stab option. And Banette had very little in the way of coverage as well. Still had Will-O-Wisp, which was a good attack, but the power level is increasing and Banette lost all of its good options, reducing it to a terrible Pokemon and the worst Ghost Stab Pokemon in the whole series, in fact. Banette has been garbage for generations as a result of this terrible, terrible event. And finally in Gen 9, they decided to grace Banette with a single buff, finally giving it a better Ghost Stab option in the form of Poltergeist, which has a great 110 power and 90% accuracy. This is a good move used by a lot of different Pokemon, and finally Banette can actually use its attack stat with a decent Ghost type attack. And yet you'll find that this also made very little difference, and Banette is still ranked ZU, which is the lowest possible tier, and it's not even used in ZU, just like Electivire. This buff was far too late, and it didn't even solve much of the root of the problem, which was that Banette lacks good coverage alongside Ghost. Maybe if they gave Banette a fighting type attack, it could have climbed a couple tiers, or just anything else, but its physical attacking move pool is so limited. It has knockoff, which is a good attack on many Pokemon, but not really that great on a Ghost type, since it hits a lot of the things that Ghost already hits. So Banette is just this frail Pokemon that can't even use its best trait, which is attack. And by Gen 9 standards, this attack is not even that high anymore. But at least it's something. At least it's the one thing it has, and Banette can't do anything with it. And this is far too little too late. And once again, just like Electivire, the stab option they give to Banette is one that also comes with a drawback, for God's sake. As if Banette needed to remain balanced, so you've got to bake in a drawback in there. Poltergeist will fail if the target has no held item. Most of the time Poltergeist will work. Most Pokemon carry held items. But there are a lot of consumable items in Pokemon that, after being consumed, don't exist on the Pokemon anymore, so Poltergeist will fail if an enemy has consumed their item, like a berry or a focus sash. There's also knockoff, which removes items, and if you've knocked off a couple items on the enemy team, they will have a bunch of Pokemon totally immune to Poltergeist. It happens, and it's a genuine drawback that is relevant, so this is also not even a straightforwardly outstanding buff for Banette, because this drawback is baked into its buff, which is very unfortunate. Now, I don't think Banette ever had any hope of OU viability, but at least with the right buffs, it could have been higher than the very bottom tier, in my opinion. And it's a tragedy what they've done to this poor Pokemon. And finally, on this level, we have Empoleon, who was buffed in Gen 9, too little too late. Empoleon back in Gen 4 was actually a great Pokemon. Thanks to its Water Steel typing, which is an excellent defensive typing, Empoleon was quite functional in many different roles. Defensive with Stealth Rock, offensive with Agility. It was an impressive Pokemon, but Empoleon felt outdated immediately as soon as the next generation came around. And it has felt that way ever since then. Empoleon has struggled with very little in the way of help for a very long time. The glory days far behind it. And when you look at its stats, these stats do feel a little bit weak for modern times. They're not terrible, but they're not amazing either. So in Gen 9, Empoleon received multiple buffs. First of all, it has the new ability Competitive, which is a pretty good new ability. Empoleon will receive a special attack boost of +2 special attack every time it receives a stat decrease, like a special version of Defiant. This is good if Empoleon is ever struck by Intimidate or Sticky Web or anything like that. It receives a great special attack boost. Empoleon also received some good new moveset options. Roost for straightforward healing is a pretty big one. Previously, Empoleon had no healing move to speak of except for the Unreliable Rest. So Roost is a big get. And Empoleon also received Flip Turn, a water type pivoting move, allowing Empoleon to leverage its nice defensive typing for some momentum as it attacks and then switches out. When I first heard about these buffs, I thought they sounded promising. I mean, it's multiple buffs for a Pokemon that was once quite strong, but in practice, Empoleon did not get too much out of these buffs, and in Gen 9 it only ended up in the RU tier. Still feels like it's lagging behind with stats that are just not up to par anymore, and competition in OU from similar Pokemon like Alomomola and Primarina, who are both water-type pivots with better traits. So unfortunately, Empoleon received these buffs a little bit too little too late as well. A few generations ago, these would have been significant, but in Gen 9, not so much. Empoleon's time is over, and the time to buff it was long ago, not now. The second level of Pokemon buffs in competitive singles. Enough to be relevant. These are not buffs that cause these Pokemon to skyrocket in viability or anything and become superstars, but they were significant enough to give these Pokemon genuine relevance in competitive play when they otherwise would not have had any relevance. A prime example of this is Quagsire. Quagsire received the new ability Unaware in Generation 5, which was a pretty significant buff for it. Unaware is a great defensive ability that causes the Pokemon to be completely ignorant towards stat stage changes. So enemies that boost their attack or special attack up significantly and try to sweep games will just do normal damage against a Pokemon that has Unaware. It's a very good defensive ability that acts as counterplay towards boost sweepers, and Quagsire is pretty excellent at using this ability Unaware. It may not be the most defensively excellent thing of all time, but its stats are alright. 95 HP is workable, its defense is 85, and the thing that makes it particularly good at this is its water-ground type combination, which is an excellent defensive typing. Only weak to grass, no other weaknesses, great defensive benefits, so Quagsire can switch in and wall most Pokemon that have boosted themselves up, and Quagsire's response to these Pokemon is to poison them with Toxic and then sit there with Recover, taking minimal damage. And this works well enough. It's extremely passive, and that's all it can do, but this is enough for Quagsire to have genuine viability on stall teams in OU formats, which is very impressive. The buff was of course not enough to make Quagsire the center of the universe or anything, but it has a genuine niche now on very defensive teams, because it's quite good at this job of countering boost sweepers. Next on this level we have Shuckle. Shuckle is an extreme Pokemon with extreme views that most don't get along with. In the world of Pokemon, Shuckle's stats are extreme. It has an enormous 230 in its defense and special defense, the highest values in each stat in the whole game, but all of its other stats are extraordinarily low. 20 HP, 10 attack, 10 special attack, and 5 speed. This may seem like it has potential with such excellent defensive stats, but Shuckle kinda just sits there and does nothing. It has no healing moves. It has little in the way of setup moves or anything useful to really do with all of its defenses. It's extraordinarily passive, and even with such high defenses, it ends up taking a lot of damage from things like Stealth Rock and all of the types it's weak to as a result of being a bug rock type, which is not a fantastic typing. But they finally gave Shuckle something to do with all of its defenses in Gen 6 with the new buff of a single moveset addition, Sticky Web. And this single moveset addition may have been a small buff, but it was enough to give Shuckle a reason to exist. Shuckle with Sticky Web was now the most elite of all Sticky Web setters in the game. Sticky Web was first released in Gen 6 and a few Pokemon got it, but Shuckle was chief among them as the best Sticky Web setting lead. Sticky Web is an entry hazard that lowers the speed of grounded Pokemon by 1 on switch in. It's very good for offensive teams, allows you to outrun the enemy much of the time, and be very aggressive. Shuckle has the ability Sturdy, which has the exact same effect as the item Focus Sash. If you're at full HP and you would have been one-hit KO'd, you instead survive on 1 HP, giving you a big safety net to always live at least 1 hit. Having this built into your ability is extremely good for a lead that wants to set Sticky Web instantly, at the very start of the game, to get this aggressive option out there as quickly as possible. So Shuckle doesn't have to equip a Focus Sash to ensure that it gets the Sticky Web, it just has Sturdy. And then Shuckle can equip the Mental Herb item, making it temporarily immune to the effects of Taunt and various other effects. Taunt is able to stop Sticky Web from coming out. It's a common form of counterplay against hazard setting leads, because Taunt stops all non-attacking moves from taking effect, but Mental Herb will cure 1 instance of Taunt and allow Shuckle to guarantee that it gets Sticky Web up on turn 1. On top of this, Shuckle also has Stealth Rock, which is a great entry hazard, and has Encore to put the enemy in an awkward position, forcing them to repeat a bad attack, maybe a Stealth Rock or entry hazard of their own, and create a good momentum scenario for teammates that want free turns to start go again now that the sticky web is down. So Shuckle is the premier sticky web setter in multiple different generations. And this gives Shuckle a reason to exist in the very competitive tier of OU. So this small buff was enough to make Shuckle relevant. It's not ranked OU by usage, it's not so good that it's going to be seen all the time, but if you want a sticky web team, Shuckle is the Pokemon that makes that happen at the highest level of consistency, and that certainly counts for something in the competitive world, doesn't it, folks? Well done to Shuckle. And finally on this level I'm going to include the famous Nidoking buff. This is the most significant buff of all of these on this level. And it may seem like I'm underrating this buff, but allow me to explain. Nidoking in Gen 5 received the new ability Sheer Force, which was a fantastic new addition for it. Sheer Force is a great offensive ability that causes all of your attacks with secondary effects to have 1.3x power at the cost of nullifying their secondary effect. A very worthy trade-off. For example, Ice Beam now has way more power, and all you lose is this measly 10% chance to freeze, which isn't likely to happen anyway. The damage is far better. Also, Sheer Force allows you to use Life Orb without the recoil, because for some reason in the code, the Life Orb recoil counts as a secondary effect and is nullified. So you get even more free damage on top of that, and Nidoking's damage output is massively enhanced. Nidoking is a great special and physical attacking move pool with plenty of options to take advantage of Sheer Force, and this buff kept it relevant. However, this buff was not enough to make Nidoking OU ranked. It was a big buff for it, it would have been pretty garbage otherwise, but Nidoking has never been an OU Pokemon. However, this buff did give it enough of a reason to exist to be a niche wall breaker in OU in multiple generations. If you look at Nidoking's stats, it is clearly a bit slower and a bit weaker defensively than a lot of OU Pokemon, but it sets itself apart at least by having a wide move pool with Sheer Force to threaten damage against a vast array of things. And that is enough to give it some relevance in OU from time to time. Not enough to be properly lifted up to God status or anything, but it was a significant enough buff to make the Pokemon relevant, and so I think it fits in this level of buffs. Level 3 of Pokemon buffs. The rich get richer. These are buffs given to Pokemon that were already very good in OU that got even better as a result of these buffs. Pokemon that didn't necessarily need the help, but appreciated it anyway, and the buff was noticeable. And a big improvement for them. A significant example of this is on the Pokemon Galarian Slowking. Galarian Slowking was introduced in Gen 8, a new regional variant of Slowking, and it was a very good Pokemon in Gen 8 OU. Galarian Slowking has a lot to be thankful for in its life. This Pokemon has very well-rounded stats, with a great balance of defenses and offenses. Its special attack is high at 110, has 95 HP, which is very good. 110 special defense is excellent, and even 80 defense is not that bad. Just extremely well-rounded stat distribution here, with everything you could want. Except for speed, but it's Slowking, so that's to be expected, and it's a defensive Pokemon. They're often slow. Galarian Slowking also has the ability Regenerator, much like its base Cantonian form. One of the strongest defensive abilities in the game, allowing you to heal a third of your max HP every time you switch. And this Pokemon had a good move pool, with options like Future Sight to queue up some damage to occur in the future, and utilize that great special attack for some real benefit. It's got Thunder Wave, and Flamethrower, and Scald, and Sludge Bomb, all sorts of desirable things, and the Poison Psychic typing is also nice. Galarian Slowking is sturdy against Fairy-type attackers. It can consume toxic spikes, it's immune to poison itself. Poison is a great defensive typing with a lot to be appreciative of. So Galarian Slowking was a very good Pokemon in Gen 8 OU already, and then in Gen 9 OU, Galarian Slowking received a pretty massive buff of a new signature move. Galarian Slowking received the new option Chilly Reception, which is an absolutely amazing new support move for it that turned it from a good Pokemon to perhaps the best special wall and defensive pivot in Gen 9 OU. Chilly Reception is a move that sets snow on the field and then switches the user out. So Chilly Reception is doing a lot in a single move. Setting snow on the field can of course be useful for your allies. If you have ice types, they get a defense bonus. If there's snow synergy, that comes into effect. Blizzard getting perfect accuracy, etc. But even if you have no snow synergy at all on your team, the move is great because it is a pivoting move on a defensive Pokemon. Galarian Slowking can click this move to allow safe entry for an ally, which is great on a slow Pokemon that has Regenerator. Pokemon with Regenerator get even more out of pivoting moves, because as soon as you pivot, you activate the healing effect. Chilly Reception, therefore, can really turn Galarian Slowking's defense into offense. It already sort of could with its high special attack and great offensive move pool, but now it can also find free entry points for allies and keep momentum up in a great and significant way. The fact that you set snow on the field while pivoting is also a form of weather insurance. A lot of enemy teams will have sun teams or rain teams built around these synergies associated with those weathers. But when you pivot out, you set snow on the field, effectively erasing their advantageous weather and replacing it with snow, which can be very good. You can deactivate chlorophyll or photosynthesis or these powerful weather synergies that they're building their whole team around. And that can win you a game, actually. That's pretty damn significant to just have weather insurance built into a move that would honestly be good if it was just a pivoting effect on this Pokemon, but pivoting effect attached with such a good additional effect is a massive buff to a Pokemon that was already very good. A perfect example of the rich getting richer. Damn it, Galarian Slowking. Stop hoarding all the powerful traits for yourself. Damn you. You couldn't have shared this buff with the rest of the class, maybe given it to Muck or someone who needs it. No, Galarian Slowking, you with your freakish shell that has eyes on it, you need to hoard all the buffs for yourself because you're a maniac and an egotist and a gluttonous freak you are, Galarian Slowking. Damn you. You will be punished for this, I promise you. Next on this level is Gliscor. This is one of the most consistently good competitive Pokemon of all time. Gliscor has achieved incredible generational wealth over the years with its elite ground flying typing, one of the strongest abilities in the game, Poison Heal, and fantastic stats and move pool as well. Gliscor just has everything you could ever ask for. It can set Stealth Rock, it has good attacking options, it can be a Swords Dance sweeper, it can remove items, it can poison you, it can do it all. And so they decided, who needs a buff in Gen 9? Who is clamoring for a new important option in Gen 9? How about we give it to Gliscor, the Pokemon that has been excellent for generations? This is certainly the rich getting richer. I mean, if you could convert Pokemon viability into net worth somehow, Gliscor would be a billionaire. But this is what we need to do, is we need to give the billionaire even more. Gliscor now has Spikes, which is one of the strongest entry hazards in the game, of course, dealing damage to grounded foes based on the amount of layers set. In fact, in many people's eyes, Spikes is better than Stealth Rock in Gen 9, due to the improved excellence of Defog and Rapid Spin blocking, as well as Spikes hitting more relevant targets, since Stealth Rock prone Pokemon equip the boots anyway. So Gliscor now has Stealth Rock and Spikes, and all of its other advantages. I suppose, to be fair, Gliscor did lose some options in Gen 9. It lost Defog and Roost, but to be honest, these moveset cuts are not that significant for Gliscor. It's still perfectly functional, and the addition of Spikes is honestly a way more significant buff than the moveset cuts are nerfs, so it feels like Gliscor got much better in Gen 9 when it was already one of the strongest Pokemon ever. And finally on this level we have Greninja in Gen 7. Greninja received a massive buff in Gen 7 when it was already an incredibly powerful Pokemon in Gen 6. Greninja is one of the strongest debut starters we've ever seen, as in Gen 6 it had the excellent ability Protean, which allowed it to change type every single time it uses a move, to the type of that move. This means Greninja effectively gets a same type attack bonus on every single one of its coverage moves, and this is very powerful as Greninja is fast with 122 speed, and has a solid special attack and physical attack stat to take advantage of this. It's not that high, but it's good enough as a baseline to take advantage of this great ability. So Greninja was an elite Pokemon in Gen 6, it was even banned to Ubers at the time. So in Gen 7 they decided to buff Greninja significantly by giving it an all-new alternate ability with a powerful new form attached. Greninja received the new ability Battle Bond, which meant that after KOing a Pokemon, it would transform into the powerful Ash Greninja form. And Ash Greninja has significantly higher stats than base form Greninja. These are legitimately legendary level stats with 145 attack, 153 special attack, and 132 speed. Ash Greninja is ludicrously fast and threatening with a higher special attack stat than Kyogre, genuinely. Ash Greninja very quickly became one of the top tier Pokemon in Gen 7 OU as a result of this buff. And I think this was mostly done because Greninja is a fan favorite and is prominent in the anime series, so they gave it another form to do stuff. But in a competitive design standpoint, it's kind of a bizarre choice for a Pokemon that was already very strong and had a distinctive identity with the ability Protean, which is honestly a far more interesting ability, allowing for more dynamic scenarios in-game where you can change types. Also allows for more moveset variety with mixed sets and utility sets, but Ash Greninja just incentivizes big damage and clicking stab moves, which is less interesting in my opinion. Ash Greninja also has the added benefit of Water Shuriken becoming buffed in the Ash Greninja form, hitting 3 times every time and with 20 power on each hit. A very powerful special attacking priority move. Certainly one of the most egregious examples of the rich getting richer. Greninja did not need the help. It would have been a fine Pokemon, perfectly viable, with its regular ability of Protean, which was already amazing in the prior gen, but this new ability pushed it into the absolute center of the format as one of the strongest Pokemon here, by brute force in my opinion, just massively enhancing its stats, and making it a less interesting Pokemon as a result. At least, the Ash Greninja form only exists in this generation and was removed from subsequent games. The Battle Bond ability now reworked to be much worse. It just gives a temporary stat boost instead of transforming you into the most broken form ever. So we can be thankful for that. That it was a temporary instance of the rich getting richer. Level 4 of Pokemon buffs, the missing piece. These are buffs to Pokemon that were quite good in past gens with genuine viability, but if not for these buffs, would have fallen off into obscurity over time. But upon receiving these buffs, they were the missing piece to bring the entire design of this Pokemon together and cause them to become actual, proper, good competitive Pokemon. If not for these buffs, they would have faded and failed to hang on to viability. But these buffs cemented them as competitive staples. The first and most significant example of this is the buff to Scizor in Generation 4. Prior to Generation 4, Scizor was an alright Pokemon, but it was not quite OU level. Scizor had a lot going for it, with the fantastic Bug Steel typing, which is an amazing defensive combo that is only weak to fire and has significant defensive advantages, with the immunities from steel and the resistances attached. Scizor has solid stats. Its HP and defense are good enough with the typing to work well. It has a great attack stat of 130. Stats are well-rounded and powerful in general, but Scizor struggled in Gens 2 and 3 due to a rather shallow move pool. Scizor did not have a good bug-type attack to utilize. Its physical attacking coverage in general was rather lacking. And in these generations, it was mainly relegated to a Baton Pass support Pokemon. It had Agility and Swords Dance plus Baton Pass, it could use that. And in these generations, that is a legal strategy. In Generation 3, you could use Reversal with Endure to activate a Lychee Berry and be a bit of an endgame sweeper, but this was rather inconsistent and difficult to pull off, and there were just better options for similar things. But in Generation 4, everything came together for Scizor. If not for these buffs in Gen 4, Scizor would have been a Pokemon with potential that never lived up to that potential. But they actually gave Scizor what it needed to succeed in Gen 4. First of all, they gave it the excellent new ability Technician, which is fantastic. Technician is a great offensive ability that causes moves with 60 power or less to have 1.5x bonus power. Alongside this new ability, Scizor received the perfect moveset option to take advantage of it, Bullet Punch, which is a steel-type priority move with 40 power. Finally, a good form of steel physical stab that Scizor can use that also makes up for its low speed due to the priority, and gets a boost from Technician to be even higher power. A 60 power priority move after Technician is pretty significant, and this will be Scizor's most famous option, known as a powerful priority user. But Scizor also has Bug Bite in Gen 4, which is a 60 power bug type physical attack that steals and eats a berry, and Bug Bite It's also boosted by Technician up to 90 power. A 90 power physical attack option is good enough for Scizor to work with. Scizor also received the excellent coverage option of Super Power in Gen 4, a fighting type attack with a massive 120 base power. Has the drawback of lowering your attack and defense, but that's worth it for the coverage and high base power. And Scizor also received the new option of U-Turn, which is another one of the most important things it received. U-Turn, an all-new option in Gen 4 with 70 power that switches you out after dealing damage. One of the new best moves in the game, and Scizor has it, and Scizor is one of the best Pokemon at using it. There's even more buffs to speak of, like Pursuit, which not only benefits from Technician, but allows Scizor to trap enemies as this attack's on the way out. Scizor just received a bunch of buffs that all worked perfectly for it and allowed Scizor to finally achieve the potential it always had. Scizor is a great Pokemon in Gen 4 OU, and it's a very strong Pokemon in multiple generations of OU in the future as well. These buffs were good enough to give Scizor a long-standing reputation as a competitive Pokemon staple, when it otherwise would have probably faded into obscurity without all of these buffs. Next on this level we have Dragonite, which may sound strange. Dragonite is known as a very strong Pokemon, but I think it's strong as a result of multiple different buffs throughout its life. And on this level I'm going to talk about the most significant of the buffs Dragonite received. But first we must contextualize. Dragonite in Gen 4 was a strong Pokemon. In Gen 4 OU, Dragonite is a top threat, and that's largely just because Dragon types in general got massively buffed in Gen 4. The physical special split happened, and Dragonite was great at utilizing the move Outrage, which was also newly buffed at the time. But there's a caveat. The reason Dragonite was so good in Gen 4 OU is because the Pokemon that outclasses it, Salamence, was banned from the tier. If Salamence was present in Gen 4 OU, Dragonite would be nothing. It would be directly inferior to Salamence. And that would also have been the case in Gen 5. Salamence was now legal in OU for the first time, and Salamence and Dragonite coexist in the same tier. If Dragonite remained unchanged in the transition from Gen 4 to 5, Salamence would have once again outclassed it. It has better stats. It has the better ability of Intimidate. Without any changes, Salamence is the clearly superior Pokemon. But of course, there was a significant change for Dragonite, and it was the change that would define its identity from now onwards. If not for this buff, Dragonite would have probably been outclassed by other dragon types and left in the dust. But this did not happen, and Dragonite received the excellent new ability in Gen 5 of Multi-Scale. And Multi-Scale is an outstanding ability. This buff was enough to make Dragonite even better than Salamence and one of the most powerful dragon-type Pokemon moving forward. Multi-Scale is an ability that takes effect when a Pokemon is at full HP. And if you're at full HP, damage taken from all attacks is halved. This means Dragonite, when at full HP, has a massive safety net against incoming hits, which greatly increases its chances to find an opportunity to use Dragon Dance, its main boosting option. Multi-Scale is a very, very significant avenue for Dragonite to achieve this free turn to Dragon Dance. Even super effective hits will be so significantly reduced in their damage that Dragonite can live them, and Dragonite will shrug off most incoming hits as a result of this ability. Of all the buffs Dragonite has received in its whole life, I think that this is the one that actually firmly set it apart from similar Pokemon and laid the groundwork for it to become the excellent Pokemon that it now is today. Still amazing all the way up until Generation 9, the current gen. If not for this buff, Dragonite's career would have been very different, and it would probably have been outclassed by similar Pokemon. But as a result of receiving Multi-Scale, history changed forever. And the final Pokemon buff I will talk about on this level is the buff to Gliscor in Gen 5, the second time Gliscor is shown up in this video. But this buff happened far before the buff I just talked about. And this is the most important buff Gliscor received in its life. If not for this buff, I think it also would have faded into obscurity, outclassed probably by Landorus Therian. In Gen 4 when Gliscor released, it was an OU ranked Pokemon and a solid one. Ground Flying was a great typing for the time. Its ability was Hyper Cutter, which makes it immune to attack drops. Not the most amazing ability, but it's something. It's not nothing. And Gliscor had key options like U-Turn, Earthquake, Taunt. It could be a Stall Breaker with Taunt. It had good defensive traits, it could wall things. It wasn't at the top of the food chain or anything, but it was a strong Pokemon. But I think that if Gliscor remained in this state forever, from this point onwards, it would not be the Pokemon we know it as today. It was the buff it received in Gen 5 that made Gliscor one of the strongest competitive Pokemon in history, and that was being granted the new ability Poison Heal. This buff changed everything for Gliscor. Poison Heal is one of the single strongest abilities in the whole Pokemon series, and it causes the poison status ailment to heal you instead of damaging you, and it heals you for 1/8 of your max HP every turn, which is double the amount that Leftovers heals. Gliscor can inflict itself with poison to activate this ability via the item Toxic Orb. This ability is so excellent not only because the amount of healing you receive is significant, but it also acts as effective status immunity. A Pokemon can only have one status ailment applied to them at a time, and since Gliscor applies poison to itself and it benefits from the poison, it can't be burned or put to sleep or anything. It's pretty much immune to all status since it's already poisoned. If not for this new ability, Gliscor's usage would have plummeted, in my opinion. It would not have held on. This ability was the foundation of Gliscor's success moving forward, and part of the reason it's such an annoying bastard, you can't even burn the guy. It feels as if it's invincible, and it's felt invincible for generations. Still one of the strongest defensive Pokemon in the game in Gen 9. Many players theorize that Gliscor is actually the devil due to the fact that he loves disease, and he will never die, and he seems to chip you out of range of justice at every turn and never face the music. I think this seems true to me. I'm gonna say that's true. Level 5 of Pokemon buffs, from mid to viable. These are buffs to Pokemon that weren't completely horrible, but were kind of average and outclassed by other options much of the time. But these buffs pushed these Pokemon from average status to genuinely viable in OU status. The most noteworthy of all these buffs would have to be to the Pokemon Clefable. In Generation 5, Clefable is ranked in the RU tier. It is a decent Pokemon. It has the ability Magic Guard, which is a fantastic ability granting immunity to indirect damage, and it's got a good support move pool. But as a mono-normal type with weak stats, Clefable is not particularly outstanding. It has niche value at best. But in Generation 6, that would change completely as Clefable became one of the best Pokemon in Gen 6 OU immediately as a result of this new buff. Clefable's typing was changed in Generation 6 from normal type to fairy type. The fairy type was completely new in Gen 6, and Clefable is one of a few Pokemon that had their typing changed to fairy, and this was overall a massive buff for Clefable. Fairy is one of the strongest monotypes you can have in Pokemon. This is because Fairy is only weak to two types, Steel and Poison. And of all the types to be weak to, these are very manageable with teammates. It's very easy to fit Steel and Poison answers on your team. Defensively, Fairy has a lot going for it. You have a Bug resistance, which resilient against U-turn, Fighting resistance, and Dark resistance. These are a common coverage combo and two of the most commonly used offensive types in the game. And most of all, Fairy has a complete immunity to Dragon. This is the best defensive trait of Fairy, and it totally changed the whole game and shifted the dynamics of the type chart massively, as Dragons became one of the best types in the game to a sort of average type after this. Being completely immune to Dragon is massive, and Fairy is quite good offensively too. It hits a lot of things neutrally, it's super effective against Dragon, Fighting, and Dark types. So as a mono Fairy type, you have a lot of advantages, and Clefable is the classic Fairy type. It is the archetypical Fairy. With Magic Guard, it has incredible defensive value, totally immune to hazards and status and all residuals. And Clefable's move pool is outstanding. It has healing with Soft Boiled, straightforward, a great option. It can be a Calm Mind sweeper with its vast special attacking move pool and the beautiful new option of Stab Moonblast, which is so good. Clefable has Stealth Rock and Thunder Wave and Knockoff and Encore and all sorts of utility. Clefable is one of the easiest Pokemon to fit on teams in Gen 6. It is so great defensively, it's so reliable as a wall, and it can do so many different things. It is one of the most prominent competitive Pokemon to this day even, as Clefable remains ranked OU in Gen 9. And this change was the foundation of Clefable's future excellence, immediately turning it from a mid-declining defensive Pokemon to one of the strongest ever, with a single change. Next on this level, I'd like to talk about the buff to Bisharp in Gen 6, which was unfortunately a short-lived peak for Bisharp, but I think it's worth mentioning anyway. I would like to give Bisharp its flowers for being genuinely great in Gen 6 OU, and especially because it's recently been overshadowed by its new evolution, King Gambit. People forget that good old Bisharp was once a very strong Pokemon. Bishop was released in Gen 5, where it's just kind of average. This Pokemon is never used in OU, it has no niche there, it's ranked UU, and there's not a whole lot going for this Pokemon. It's not terrible, it has a Dark Steel typing, which is a pretty strong type combo. It has a good attack stat, solid defense, but it's slow, and its offensive tools are not that exciting in Gen 5. But in Gen 6, it was a perfect storm for Bishop to now thrive. Partially due to direct buffs and partially due to indirect buffs. The direct buffs were that Bishop got the new option of Knock Off, which was a universal buff to the dark type, really. Knock Off was massively buffed in Generation 6 to now be a genuine attacking option with a high 65 power, boosted further by 1.5x power if the attack is knocking off an item. So it's a form of dark stab and item removal in one. Incredibly powerful option and one of the best attacks in the game to this day. Bishop having access to this newly buffed knockoff was significant for it. But also, it benefited from various indirect buffs. The ability Defiant is a good ability that grants an attack boost by +2 if you have a stat lowered. But in Gen 6, this ability had further value because of the fact that Defog was introduced to the series as a newly buffed option that can remove hazards. Defog removes hazards and also lowers the opponent's evasion. And because of the evasion lowering, Defog will trigger Defiant and give Bishop a stat boost. As a result of that, Bishop can act as a form of counterplay against Defog by receiving this massive boost if the enemy chooses to Defog against you. And that is significant. Bishop's typing also feels beautiful here, as with the introduction of Fairy, it is very nice to be a dark type that is neutral to Fairy because of your Dark Steel dual typing. And also, you threaten Fairy super effectively with your Stab Steel type attacks. All of this was a perfect storm for Bishop to finally thrive, at least in one generation in Gen 6 OU, when in just the previous generation it was completely mid. And the final buff on this level is to Alomomola, who was massively buffed in Generation 9, and is actually OU viable for the first time in its life in Generation 9, but all generations prior to this, Alomomola was pretty average. Alomomola does have good stuff going for it, of course, in these generations. It's a mono water type, which you can't go too wrong with. It has the great ability Regenerator, massive HP, and decent enough defenses. But Alomomola always felt awkward. It's a bit too passive, it doesn't do much with its good defensive traits, and it's often outclassed by other similar Regenerator Pokemon like Slowbro and Toxapex who just do a bit more. But in Generation 9, Alomomola received the key option that made it genuinely good for the first time in its life, and it was the simple option of Flip Turn. With this new option, Alomomola now has an ability to pivot with a damaging move that pivots on use. As we mentioned earlier with Galarian Slowking, having a pivoting move on a Pokemon with a Regenerator is even more valuable because the moment you pivot, you activate Regenerator and heal yourself. Alomomola can leverage its low speed and great bulk for pivot entry points to allies, and as a result, Alomomola is one of the most popular physically defensive pivots in Gen 9 OU. Alomomola also gets a lot out of this because it has Wish. This has always been one of the more interesting options Alomomola has. Wish is a healing move that heals whatever is on the field for 50% of the user's max HP. Alomomola has a massive HP stat, so it can heal an ally for a significant amount with Wish, but it's always been a bit awkward without a pivoting option because you have to Wish and then manually switch in your ally to heal, which is a bit dangerous. But now you have the insane combo of Wish plus a pivoting move, which is good for obvious reasons. You can click Wish and then just simply click Flip Turn to completely safely switch to an ally and then heal it for a massive amount. So Alomomola is kind of a HP generating machine. You could heal your entire team with this guy. It's bulky as hell, it's healing in the process too, every single time it switches out, and has this very safe way to pass a Wish to an ally. Alomomola also benefits from indirect changes because a bunch of other things lost Scald while Alomomola kept it. Significantly, Toxapex lost Scald, and Alomomola still has it. So Alomomola feels like the new Toxapex in a way, but one that can pivot. Slowbro also lost its pivoting option of Teleport, while Alomomola now gained a pivoting option. So it's benefiting from the other competition being worse than it, but certainly much of the success of Alomomola can be accredited to the new option of Flip Turn in its moveset, which really brought everything together for it in a significant way. This Pokemon is having a real moment in Gen 9 OU. The next level of Pokemon buffs, level 6, overpowered Megas. Sometimes a Pokemon is massively buffed by brute force, by receiving a incredibly powerful new form that totally reinvents what the Pokemon can do. It doesn't matter how bad the Pokemon's base form is if you have an incredibly powerful new Mega that totally overshadows the original form. A prime example of this is Mawile. Mawile in its base form is a pretty terrible Pokemon. Its stats are low. It doesn't really do a whole lot. It has some things going for it. The Steel Fairy typing is strong, and so is the ability Intimidate. But these stats are just impossible to work with. But Mega Mawile is one of the most significant glow-ups from base form to Mega that exist. Mega Mawile is incredibly powerful, as it receives one of the strongest abilities in the entire game, Huge Power. Some might even call this the strongest ability in the game. It's this and Wonder Guard, which are the two big ones. Huge Power doubles your attack stat, which is an absolutely insane increase to your damage output. Even Pokemon with a rather low actual base attack get a massive amount of power increase from Huge Power, and Mega Mawile has a power increase in the Mega form too, up to 105 base attack, which when doubled allows Mega Mawile to achieve ludicrous levels of damage output. Mega Mawile also gets a defense increase, special defense increase to actually be reasonably good defensively speaking, and in the base form it also has Intimidate to effectively enhance its bulk too. Mega Mawile was so overwhelming in Gen 6 that it had to be banned to Ubers, which I think says a lot about how stark this power increase is. A pure garbage Pokemon in Mawile getting such a powerful Mega that it had to be banned from the game. Next on this level of Megas that massively enhanced an otherwise pretty bad Pokemon, we have Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan in its base state is really quite a bad Pokemon. And I'm sorry to say so, she is a mother and she's doing a very good job. But Kangaskhan, even back in Gen 1 when you debuted, you were outclassed by other normal types. And that's kind of the story of your life, Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is outclassed by other normal types at every turn, and it only gets worse as the series goes on. If you weren't good back in Gen 1, when normal was at its peak, you're not going to be great in Gen 6, when power levels have increased and normal isn't even a good type anymore. But Kangaskhan is one of the strongest of all the Mega Evolutions, and that is the power of good parenting, folks. As the child comes out of the pouch to fight alongside its mother in a very heroic turn of events. And this child has learned well, evidently, because Mega Kangaskhan is such a stark power increase to base form Kangaskhan that this Pokemon is banned in Gen 6 and 7. Even more powerful than Mega Mawile. Mega Kangaskhan has the ability Parental Bond when it Mega Evolves, which causes the child to attack alongside its mother. All of your attacks in this form will hit a second time, and the second hit will have halved damage. On a surface level, this is a straightforward increase to all of your damage, like a 1.5x damage increase. You get an additional attack at half damage. Yes, it's half damage, but that's a massive increase to the amount of damage you're dealing, especially because Mega Kangaskhan receives an attack increase up to 125. Also receives pretty good defensive boosts, and it's base 100 speed too, so it's not too slow either. But what makes this really excellent is not just the straightforward damage increase, but the fact that since you're hitting a second time, you get to activate secondary effects an additional time. And the chief way to abuse this is with the move Power Up Punch. Power Up Punch is a fighting type attack with 40 power that has a 100% chance to raise your attack by 1. So you can use this move and it will hit twice, raising your attack by 2 since it hits twice. This is the most powerful synergy Mega Kangaskhan has. It is able to attack and then Swords Dance at the same time. But also you have Body Slam, which is a solid normal stab option that also has a 30% power chance, and this 30% power chance happens twice, massively increasing the chance that you'll actually paralyze the opponent. Another very powerful synergy with Mega Kangaskhan is Seismic Toss. Seismic Toss is a move that just deals a flat amount of damage based on the enemy's level, which is usually 100, because most things want to be max level with very few exceptions. So this damage output is actually not tied to your attack stat, and therefore it kind of bypasses the drawback of Parental Bond, and you will just use Seismic Toss twice, effectively dealing 200 flat damage to the opponent, which is an incredible amount of flat damage to deal without any attack investment needed. So Mega Kangaskhan can run bulky sets that just click Seismic Toss and deal 200 damage to anything, which is a massive amount. And that is also very powerful. The Mega Kangaskhan is an absolute hero and is applauded worldwide for the incredible parental bond between mother and child. They're very in sync, they understand each other, they have a very deep bond. And this is my personal favorite Mega. This is my favorite Mega. I love the flavor of it. I love that the child comes out and joins in, the additional hit and how that can create new synergies. It kind of reinvents what powerful means with like 200 damage seismic toss and stuff. At least if something's going to be broken, have it be broken in an interesting and fun way like Mega Kangaskhan. Not like Ash Greninja where they just gave it more stats. Mega Kangaskhan is doing incredible mother-son activities that you wouldn't believe, and it's powerful. So I very much support Mega Kangaskhan. I want that to be on the record and understood that I support mothers worldwide. And then of course there is Mega Sableye. Sableye in its base state is quite a bad Pokemon. It does have some stuff going for it. Dark Ghost is a nice typing, good utility move pool, and good ability in Prankster, but just like with Mawile, despite those advantages, the stats are just very difficult to overcome for Sableye. Its stats are really atrocious, especially as the power level ramps each generation, they become even more atrocious. But Mega Sableye is one of the absolute strongest Megas in the whole game, and that is because Mega Sableye not only receives massive defensive buffs to its stats, but also the ability Magic Bounce, which is a top tier defensive ability. Magic Bounce will cause your Pokemon to be completely unaffected by status moves and will in fact not only be immune to them but bounce them back to the opponent. So if the opponent tries to poison you with Toxic, they'll Toxic themselves. Same deal with just about any status ailment in the game. And that is absolutely incredible. The immunity by itself would be good, but the fact that you bounce it back to the enemy and get value out of their turn is incredible and just an insane amount of value to get out of an ability. It's truly top tier, but what's more is the fact that Magic Bounce not only blocks status moves, but entry hazards. So if the enemy sets Stealth Rock or Spikes against Mega Sableye, you not only shield your team from these entry hazards by simply switching in, but also they get bounced back to the enemy and now you have effectively set Stealth Rock without doing anything. And that is probably the most powerful thing about Magic Bounce, is that it acts as a deterrent against entry hazards. Now most Pokemon with Magic Bounce are kind of garbage to offset how strong the ability is, like Xatu, who is quite terrible. Hatterene is the best modern Magic Bouncer, but it's not that fantastic without Magic Bounce. Magic Bounce is really carrying. But Mega Sableye is the best Magic Bounce Pokemon in history. The typing is outstanding, Dark and Ghost. Only one weakness to Fairy, so many immunities. Mega Sableye's stats are very good as well, the defensive stats. And its move pool is excellent. It has Recovery and Foul Play to use the enemy's attack against them, and act as a bit of a anti-boost sweeper individual. It has Toxic, straightforward status inflicting option. These options aren't too fancy, but they're good enough to be a functional defensive Pokemon with the strongest defensive ability ever. Plus this typing. So Mega Sableye, one of the strongest Megas we've ever seen, consistently viable in Gen 6 and 7 Ubers, banned in Gen 6 from being used in OU. A very powerful entity, and a very annoying entity. Very annoying Pokemon to face, Mega Sableye. Feels like it has too many things going for it. And the final level of Pokemon buffs, level 7, Meteoric Rise. These are Pokemon that were genuinely bad. They were bad Pokemon, but as a result of a buff, they rose significantly in viability, either becoming strong OU Pokemon or sometimes even Uber's viable or Uber's ranked Pokemon. And I would put this level above the previous level of the overpowered Megas, even though you could argue that the overpowered Megas are a starker increase in power, but I would give respect to Pokemon that were buffed in their base state so significantly that they rose up to the heavens rather than receiving a new Mega, because in a way a new Mega is like a totally different Pokemon. And Megas were also a temporary mechanic that don't exist in all generations, whereas if a Pokemon is buffed, those buffs carry through to future generations. So yes, Lopunny was massively buffed by receiving a new Mega, but I almost think as Mega Lopunny as a completely different Pokemon to base form Lopunny, and as soon as Megas stopped existing in Gen 8, Lopunny went back to being pure garbage. For that reason, I would put this level, level 7, as the highest level of Pokemon buffs, because these are buffs that persisted and were direct buffs to the actual Pokemon. First on this level, I think we must discuss Blaziken. Blaziken in Gen 5 received one of the biggest buffs in Pokemon history. Prior to Generation 5, this Pokemon was an alright mixed attacker, but it was really not anything special. It was ranked UU in Gen 4, which is not completely horrible, but I think that if not for this buff, it would have fallen down the tiers very quickly from Gen 5 onwards. But in Gen 5, Blaziken received a meteoric buff of the new ability Speed Boost. Speed Boost is an incredible ability that causes your Pokemon to get +1 to its speed every single turn, at the end of every turn. So there's a completely passive way for a Pokemon to boost its speed without actually spending a turn selecting a speed boosting move. Blaziken can simply use Protect to shield itself from an incoming hit, get a free speed boost, and it's very quickly outrunning the absolute entire metagame. Blaziken has Swords Dance to boost its attack by 2, and when it does this, it then also gets a speed boost, like a way better version of Dragon Dance. Blaziken has a great attack stat of 120, a very strong firefighting stab combination, a great offensive typing. And so Blaziken with Speed Boost was an absolute demon. It was banned from Gen 5 OU, and it's actually a viable Pokemon in Gen 5 Ubers, able to destroy teams full of legendaries. It's that good. It even very quickly outruns the whole tier in Gen 5 Ubers, and it's strong enough to genuinely dish out some serious damage and clean up games up there. And Blaziken, as a result of the Speed Boost buff, was Ubers ranked for a very long time. From Gen 5 until Gen 7. It only fell down in Gen 8 when metagame shifts made it a bit more manageable, but for a long time there, this was a ridiculous meteoric buff for a Pokemon that would have been quite bad otherwise. I would also put Superior on this level. Superior in Gen 5 when it came out was a NU ranked Pokemon, which is a very low tier. This Pokemon was really nothing special. A mono grass type with a low special attack of only 75. It's relatively fast, but it can't leverage that speed for much of anything, except maybe Leech Seed and Substitute, which is a bit of a gimmick. But in Gen 6, Superior had access to its new ability, Contrary, and this completely changed everything for Superior, resulting in one of the starkest increases from game to game ever. Going from NU to immediately OU, and Superior is in fact a top 3 Pokemon in Gen 6 OU. One of the strongest in the whole game, and a staple of the format. Contrary is an ability that inverts all stat stage changes. If you were to lose stats, you instead gain them, and vice versa. If you were to gain stats, you instead lose them. The reason this is so incredible on Superior is because it has Leaf Storm, and Leaf Storm is a high power 130 power grass type special attack that has the drawback of lowering your special attack by 2, but of course with Contrary this drawback becomes an incredible advantage, and Leaf Storm turns into one of the strongest moves ever. This is a move with 130 power that also basically gives you a free nasty plot. So Superior has this extraordinarily strong ramping option with massive power that turns it into an absolute demon. And this alone sorts your offensive potency. You basically have a one move solution to all your offensive problems. Your special attack scarcely matters when Leaf Storm is so powerful and ramps you so significantly. So Superior can invest in bulk and still be threatening. Doesn't even need to invest in special attack to be threatening. It has Glare, which is a great paralysis inflicting move that can hit ground types because it's a normal type move. This is truly one of the most incredible buffs a Pokemon has ever received, turning a nothing Pokemon into a staple of competitive instantaneously. Another Pokemon that I believe fits firmly in this level is Pelipper. Pelipper is another Pokemon that was absolutely nothing for a very long time. This was an early game pelican creature that nobody thought twice about. I mean, this is a Pokemon with poor stats, a typing that's alright but is quite targetable, and abilities that just aren't very exciting. But everything changed in Generation 7 when Pelipper also received one of the biggest buffs a Pokemon has ever received, with the new ability, Drizzle. This is the same ability that makes Kyogre so excellent. Pelipper was blessed with the ability of Kyogre. Drizzle will simply set Rain Dance on the field when you switch in. Weather setting abilities are elite in competitive Pokemon in all contexts, doubles, singles, whatever. Setting weather is incredibly valuable, and Pelipper very quickly became the top rain setter in the game, and rain in most generations is the best form of weather. Rain is incredible. Water is a strong type to begin with, and rain boosts the power of water. A lot of defensive Pokemon benefit from rain being up because of fire damage being mitigated, like Ferrothorn and Scizor They love to be in the rain to reduce that fire damage. And there's also some incredible rain synergy in most games. Swift Swim is an outstanding ability that doubles speed in the rain. A lot of strong water types get this, like Kingdra. Mega Swampert. Ash Greninja exists in Gen 7 and is an incredible rain abuser. There's like Crawdaunt Rain. The simple plan of spamming water type attacks and running rain synergies is usually good, and Pelipper, ever since it received Drizzle in Gen 7, became the chief weather setter of the series, almost, in OU at least. And you could make the same case for Politoed, who had a similar scenario back in Gen 5, where it was an average Pokemon that then received Drizzle and became central to that format, but I think Pelipper quickly overshadowed Politoed as another garbage Pokemon that received Drizzle and just totally outclassed Politoed. So I would give the flowers to Pelipper, who is now much more intertwined with the identity of Rain. Everyone thinks of Pelipper as the Rain Pokemon, and the reason it's better than Politoed is also because it has a superior typing and moveset options. It has Defog, which is good utility, U-Turn, which allows you to pivot into Rain abusers. Also just has Roost, allowing it to heal and be decent defensively when you invest in defense. Its typing is alright. It has Hurricane as well, which is itself Rain synergy. Hurricane has perfect accuracy in the rain. So Pelipper just outdoes Politoed completely and is not only the new best rain Pokemon, but it actually has a toolkit to help abuse rain itself. Feels like it was always supposed to set rain, even though it's literally just a pelican with a godlike power. Doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it, but who's complaining? I'm not complaining. I like Pelipper, he's cool. I like the pelican, it's a beautiful creature. They got a very big beak. They're quite incredible when you see them in person. They're quite lovely and majestic, so I'm not too miffed about Pelipper having its day. You can bring up Torkoal receiving Drought too, and this was also a significant buff, happening at the same time as Pelipper receiving Drizzle. Torkoal really benefited from this, as before having Drought, it was just a bad defensive fire type, which is a concept that doesn't really work very well. But I think Pelipper is the clear winner of the two, if you had to compare them, because Torkoal has never actually been ranked OU, whereas Pelipper was immediately great in OU. And even now, when Sun is at the peak of its power in Gen 9, Torkoal is actually outclassed by Ninetales as the superior Drought setter, whereas Pelipper is always outclassing its competition of Politoed. So unfortunately, Torkoal receiving Drought is not as significant of a buff. I don't know if I'd even include it here, because Sun is a bit rough as a weather effect for many generations there, and in Gen 9, Ninetales outclasses it. And finally, I think that the most significant buff in the entire Pokemon series was to this Pokemon right here. Ditto. I think that this is the biggest buff a Pokemon has ever received, because prior to this buff, Ditto was genuinely pure garbage. Perhaps the worst Pokemon in the whole game. Maybe the only Pokemon that can claim it's worse than Ditto is Unknown, but I don't know, at least Unknown could do damage more consistently. I don't even know if Unknown is necessarily worse than Ditto. Ditto, prior to Generation 5, had 48 in all of its stats, and the ability Limber, which grants paralysis immunity, which is very unexciting. And it can only learn a single move, Transform, which is a move that transforms you into the enemy Pokemon, copying their stats, moveset, stat changes, etc. It can be an interesting move, but Ditto is so terrible with such horrible stats that it actually clicking Transform is so unlikely. And pulling off a Transform is extremely unlikely. This is just a Pokemon concept that was dysfunctional for so many generations. From Gen 1 to 4, Ditto just didn't work. It just didn't do anything. You'll be very lucky to survive a hit and then transform and then do something. It was so unlikely. But in Gen 5, they totally reworked Ditto to actually be a Pokemon, to actually be genuine, with the simple change of the new ability Imposter, which was a new way for Ditto to transform much more reliably. Imposter is an outstanding ability. It has the effect of, on switch in, transforming you instantly into the enemy Pokemon. Now you no longer have to switch in, live a hit, and select transform. You just transform immediately, which is way better and way more powerful. And Ditto actually became a genuine option as a form of counterplay against boost sweepers, because when you transform into an enemy with Imposter, you copy their stat stage changes, and then if you have a choice scarf equipped, which Ditto often does, you always outspeed them because you have a speed boost and they don't. So if you're up against a Dragonite that is boosted up significantly with Dragon Dance. You can switch in a Ditto, copy all of their boosts, and then outrun them and take the boosts for yourself, sometimes reverse sweeping them. This is a genuinely valuable niche, and Ditto, despite itself being ranked in low tiers oftentimes, is kind of a difficult Pokemon to actually rank by Smogon's system, because it's not even really a Pokemon, it's like a piece of counter tech. It copies the enemy Pokemon and counteracts their boosts. And in fact, Ditto is present in the Gen 9 Uber's viability rankings. It is B rank, which is a higher rank than most Pokemon I've spoken about in this whole video. Ditto is more viable in Gen 9 Ubers than most Pokemon in this video, because it copies other legendaries and can use their stats against them, which is very good against a Koraidon that is boosted up, or a Zacian Crowned with the Swords Dance or Switch-In boosts. Any boost sweeper in Ubers, you can just copy them and reverse sweep. It's a form of insurance against any boost sweeper. It's worth noting though, folks, that when you transform in Pokemon, you do not copy the HP stat. This is the one stat you do not copy. So Ditto is always a bit weaker bulk-wise than its opponent that it transforms into, because it only has 48 base HP. But this usually doesn't stop Ditto from pulling off the reverse sweep technology that it is designed to do, and I can't think of a more stark increase in a Pokemon's viability than that of Ditto, who was genuinely the worst Pokemon in the game and now is viable in the top tier of Gen 9 Ubers. If you can think of a better buff than that, then you let me know, folks, but I believe Ditto is the most buffed Pokemon in the history of the series. Thank you for watching, folks, and I'll see you in the next one.